this thing has as many headlamps as a Ferrari F40 does cylinders. And yet, the real insanity is way back there in the engine compartment. Because the Cizeta-Moroder V16T has 16 cylinders. And when it comes to supercars, nothing matters more than cylinder count. Or Bugatti wouldn't be making a new 16-cylinder for the tourbillon. But before Bugatti had ever made its first puny little V12, this was the first road-going sports car to use a 16-cylinder engine. And the rest of the car was so impressive, it damn near won a comparison test against a Ferrari F40, a Porsche 959, and a Lamborghini Countach. So why have you never seen a Cizeta? Well, had you asked the man who created it, he would have given you a number of reasons and excuses and conspiracy theories, and then would have sued you for asking. If you ask me, this didn't sell because karma is a bitch. A 6-liter, 8-camshaft, 64-valve, 8,000 RPM bitch. This is the one and only Cizeta-Moroder V16T. This is the prototype that was used for all the media coverage and road tests of the car that would eventually become known as just the Cizeta V16T. Moroder is, of course, the name for Giorgio Moroder, the Academy Award-winning music producer known to some as the father of disco. And significant here because he was the investor responsible for much of the development costs, then was the eventual owner of this car. More on him later. Cizeta is Italian for CZ, the initials of Claudio Zampoli, the man who conceived and created this late 80s, early 90s supercar. After training as an engineer, Italian-born Zampoli went to work for Lamborghini, where he spent 8 years as a development test driver with Bob Wallace, Paolo Stanzani, and the Dream Team, as they created the Miura SV, Countach, Espada, and Urraco, just to name a few. CZ then moved to America to help set up a dealer and service network for Lamborghini, but stayed in Los Angeles when the company decided it would pull out of America in 1975. He purchased an Italian car repair shop and made quite a name for himself working on the exotic Italian supercars of Hollywood celebrities.
Oh, this thing is running great. It's just running great. It's so smooth into the curves. I'm out of here.
Oh, he was a very busy guy. And Zampoli said, Americans are the toughest customers for exotic cars. Elsewhere, they put up with breakdowns and problems because they know the car is special. But in the States, they just want things to work. And that's especially true in Hollywood. You can imagine a bunch of spoiled, rotten, rich celebrities wouldn't put up with constant aggravation just to look good. And you can understand how someone like Zampoli, who spent his life fixing broken Lamborghinis, could be led to think, I can do this better. And that's exactly what happened. Zampoli set out to create his own supercar. First things first, between 1982 and 84, he would sell off his own collection of cars. I'd just like to point out that these cars today are worth more than $55 million. Had he done nothing but kept his cars, Zampoli would have become a very rich man. So this whole thing was a terrible idea right from the start. Not that anyone would have been able to tell Zampoli that. Listen, when the first person told him his idea of a supercar wasn't going to work, he decided to name the thing the Revenge T16. Anyway, he knew customers would be skeptical of an upstart brand, so Zampoli made a couple of decisions that would make this car irresistible to customers. Not the least of which would be giving it 76 headlights. First and foremost, it had to have 16 cylinders because anybody else can have a piddly 12. Second, it had to work as a car. Not only would it not overheat in 100-degree LA traffic like those finicky Italian things, it would blast ice-cold air conditioning at its well-pampered owners. Should they choose to have fresh air, it would have power windows that opened, unlike those little mail slots the Countach had. To give the car max cred, it would be designed by the man who did the Countach, Marcello Gandini. And it would be engineered by the same team who engineered the Countach, meaning it would have to be developed and built where those experts lived, and where their suppliers were located. One in particular, Tecnostile, who did work for both Ferrari and Lamborghini, and whose engineer, Oliviero Pedrazzi, would design the V16. The big engineering challenge with a V16 is exactly the same reason why it had been more than 50 years since the last one was produced. Width. The longer a crankshaft gets, the weaker it is. Add a transmission to one end, and the cylinders that are 3, 4, 5 feet away from it will put a strong twisting force on the crankshaft that can deform it, or just break it, especially at very high revs. This thing needed to rev to 8,000 RPM. Oh my God, it's huge. The solution is what Mercedes had done on its 300 SLR race cars straight 8, pull power from the center of the engine. This means the furthest twisting force on the crankshaft is only 4 cylinders away from the output. This engine uses 2 identical crankshafts taken from the Lamborghini Urraco P300, which was absolutely not coincidentally designed by the exact same Oliviero Pedrazzi. The 2 crankshafts are cross-plane and they're mounted butt to butt, but clocked at a 45-degree offset, meaning this engine runs effectively as 2 identical burbly American-style V8s that are turning at exactly the same speed, where one fires exactly halfway between the other's power pulses. So, at idle, you can hear the V8 burble. It's just happening a lot faster than normal. A lot more complex. There's a lot more happening with some belt whine and some gear whine on top of it. And then if I give it any throttle, any boot, it gets a big intake noise and a almost GT350R Chewbacca burble. It sounds just like a GT350R, but like maybe 4 of them running at the same time. It's an incredibly deep, complex sound. By the way, that's only 4,500 RPM on an engine that goes to 8 grand. I guess we'll have to do more of this on the road later after the show. This is the actual prototype engine that Zampoli had built. It was first installed in a Ferrari 308 that Cizeta quartered so they could extend it in both width and length to fit. And allegedly, Zampoli drove the mule around SoCal quite a bit. Having the V16 mounted in a chopped-up Ferrari started speculation that it was just 2 Ferrari V8s. But what really fueled that speculation was the fuel system. 2 of them, in fact, each taken from a Ferrari 308 and set up to run half the engine. This one runs this half. This one runs that half. Symmetrical. For decades now, people have incorrectly assumed that this is 2 Ferrari V8s, or that it's 2 Lamborghini V8s. Neither is the case. It does share crank bore and stroke with the Lambo V8, but its cylinder liner and head gasket surface design is taken straight from the Ferrari V8. And the valve train is nothing like either, closer to Cosworth style than either of those Italians. In other words, this engine is its own thing. And its development cost Moroder and Zampoli $1 million. And that's despite Tecnostile having borrowed so much from its Ferrari and Lamborghini clients. It doesn't matter that it uses 4 heads with 8 camshafts, or that it uses 2 discrete crankshafts. All 16 cylinders are within 1 cast block, which means this is a real V16. And it had to fit sideways in the car, a challenge that only supercar packaging expert Marcello Gandini could have mastered. If the V16T looks a lot like Countach and Diablo, it's because this is effectively Gandini's design for the Diablo. P132, as he called it, was heading for production in 1987 as the replacement for the Countach, when Chrysler purchased Lamborghini and asked him to tone it down. Gandini offered a slightly modified version of the P132 to Cizeta, and then worked with Zampoli to redesign the rear to be even more aggressive. This used the taillights from the Renault Alpine GTA, and here's the final product, shown a year before Lamborghini showed off its softened Diablo. Underneath, the structure was very simple, done by a dream team of engineers from Lamborghini's past. In fact, there were more of the original Lamborghini crew working for Cizeta than there were left at Lamborghini. It used an old-school style tubular space frame with aluminum body panels, no carbon fiber gimmicks, and so it weighs 4,000 pounds. We put it on scale. Double wishbone suspension, massive Brembo brakes, and center-lock wheels. It was all tried and true stuff, because tried and true stuff works. And when you need to work on the car, well, it had an enormous clamshell that gave access to everything. Zampoli pointed out, quote, "I've serviced cars like this for too long. Reaching things was a priority." Reaching media and potential customers was a priority for Giorgio Moroder, who had been having a hard time keeping Zampoli on track to finish the car. And 2 years into the Zampoli-Moroder relationship, he had had enough. And he just went ahead and organized a $350,000 Hollywood debut party for the car, with the subtext being, "Hey, Claudio, the car had better be ready because we're trotting it out one way or another." Well, the car made it. The star-studded debut was emceed by Claudio's good friend Jay Leno, and couldn't have been more 1980s if cocaine and pieces of Madonna were sprinkled from the ceiling.
This is really amazing. It's almost hard for people to understand how exciting this is. I would equate this to Enzo Ferrari in 1949 or Lamborghini in the early 60s when these men said, "I want to build my own car and I'm going to do it, and this is how I did it." And the two men responsible, of course, Claudio Zampoli and Giorgio Moroder, the chief investor of the car.
The audience's reception was one of awe, and then utter shock when they heard the price. The V16T would cost $250,000. But with 560 horsepower, 0 to 60 in 4 seconds, and a 200+ mile-an-hour top speed, the Cizeta-Moroder V16T was one of the fastest cars in the world. Unfortunately, and to the great dismay of Giorgio Moroder, it was not one of the fastest cars to enter production. A year and a half after that Hollywood gala, 7 cars had been sold, but it wasn't even close to being ready for production. So Moroder tried to help out. He went and talked to Porsche tuner Gambala, who swore they could take this prototype and turn it into a regular production car in just 6 months, using a fiberglass body and swapping in the new V12 from the then new BMW 850i. Well, Zampoli flipped TF out because he felt that an off-the-shelf V12 would kill any chance this car had of succeeding. And he was probably right. Problem was, Moroder was also right, because Zampoli's Modena-based suppliers refused to give him the parts he needed to build the V16. And the car with no engine would also have no chance of survival. In other words, either way, the car was dead. This argument started a rift that would be the fatal blow to the Cizeta-Moroder partnership. In the end, Giorgio Moroder walked away with this prototype, and Zampoli inherited the nightmare of trying to get the new, now just Cizeta V16T into production. And it actually happened, with the first car being delivered about half a year after the divorce. And over the next 2 years, a couple of cars did trickle out of the factory, none of which, of course, had a BMW 850i V12, though the production cars actually used the cornering lights from an 850i. This prototype didn't. But of course it did use an E30 side marker light, and 911 dash vents, and Delta Integrale lowers, and a Lancia climate control system. This one doesn't have a seatbelt for the driver but you know. There were also some other differences between the prototype and the production cars, including a completely new interior, new fuel injection, and a 40 horsepower drop. But the big change was a huge price increase. Now almost triple the original estimate, the V16T cost over $600,000, 1.5 times as much as a Ferrari F40. The price was off the charts, but so too were the positive reviews, and they all came from drives of this very car. It was a bit stressful to drive because it was so wide, 3 inches wider even than a Countach. But the general consensus was it did everything well. So well, in fact, that it made the Countach look like a kit car in comparison. This is from Car Magazine in a comparison test between the V16T and the Countach, and a Ferrari F40 and a Porsche 959. And here's where Zampoli's genius in involving the original Lamborghini team and Marcello Gandini really paid off. Not one point in this comparison test did they say fly-by-night operation, upstart, or point out that Cizeta had a grand total of 15 employees. No, they talked about this $600,000 supercar in the same sentence as an F40 and a 959. And by the way, if it weren't for a couple of pre-production oddities, it might have actually won that comparison test, beating all 3. And here's the craziest part. There's evidence that this car never once ran on all 16 cylinders before its mechanicals were comprehensively gone through a couple years ago, which means that this car damn near beat a Ferrari F40 and a Porsche 959 with 2 dead cylinders. In case you were wondering why anyone would need 16 cylinders, that's why. So how could this have been a failure? How could there have only ever been 11 of them sold? As always, there are multiple factors. There was the same global recession that's blamed for the Bugatti EB110's failure. There's also the outrageous price, and the years-long production delays, and the fact that it was never homologated for sale in the US, which meant it couldn't be sold to the same Hollywood crowd that Zampoli designed it for. Zampoli threw out the same conspiracy theories as Bugatti's CEO did, accusing the other Italian supercar makers of pressuring their shared suppliers not to provide parts for this engine. And in this case, maybe it was a bit justified, because anyone working for Ferrari would take one look at that engine and recognize their own work. So of course they'd be pissed off. But the biggest factor was perhaps Zampoli himself. Remember, Cizeta was literally his initials. This car's reputation rode almost entirely on Zampoli's character. And here's an illustration of that character. The man who once wanted to call this car the Revenge named the very last V16T produced the TTJ, which stood for Take That, J, as a vindictive and childish way to get back at his one-time friend and now enemy who said he would never finish that car. That friend's name? Jay Leno. After Cizeta succumbed to bankruptcy in 1994, Claudio increasingly turned to dastardly or even fraudulent ways to raise money to keep his dream alive. One of those moves was an attempt to sell Leno a Lamborghini Miura SV that Claudio didn't own. The two eventually had an argument over this at a car show, after which Zampoli accused Leno of publicly calling him a crook. And then in 1999, Zampoli sued Jay Leno for libel to the tune of $150 million. No, that can't be right. That's ridiculous. No one's suing Mr. Leno for $150 million. That's absurd. How much was it? What? Are you freaking kidding me? He must have been a sociopath or an evil bastard. No, really, $150 million. The lawsuit ended in Leno's favor because, of course, there can't be libel for calling Zampoli a crook if, in fact, he was one. And multiple other successful lawsuits against Zampoli seem to indicate the same pattern of crookery. If that wasn't enough, just wait till you hear what Zampoli did to his own lawyer. Okay, during that lawsuit, Claudio's shop had been working on his lawyer's beloved and rare Maserati. And at some point after the trial, lawyer calls in to check on the car, see if it's done, says, hey, can I pick up the Maserati? And Claudio's response? What Maserati? Oh yeah, Oh yeah, no one has seen this Maserati since. The lawyer winds up suing Zampoli and wins, but there's no money to be had, until the feds come in and swoop in and raid Zampoli's storage facility, seizing 2 V16Ts to use as collateral to pay his judgments. I mean, take that, Claudio. TTC. Holy shit. If you're ever interested in a real-life Italian drama, spend some time going through Zampoli's public posts on Facebook and in Ferrari chat. You'll need popcorn and probably a Valium to get through them. It's genuinely upsetting. It's what seems like dozens or even hundreds of delusional rants from a clearly paranoid man whose ego just couldn't cope with the possibility of failure. It is a frightening look at the ego of a man whose Modenese dialect nickname, which dated all the way back to Lamborghini, was Savage, the Savage. Zampoli seemingly made enemies of everyone, from Valentino Balboni to Jay Leno, to his own wife and his mistress of 10 years, to his business partners, to Giorgio Moroder, and just about everyone he'd ever worked with. Including the author of this book, who did a phenomenal job at documenting the entire history of Cizeta, together with Claudio. Until, of course, Claudio threatened to sue him because the book included things that weren't all positive. This story is nuts, and if you'd like to read more about it, I will put a link to this book in the description below. Craziness. But no matter who you talk to, and no matter how badly Claudio Zampoli screwed them, they unanimously praise his abilities as an engineer and a mechanic. And so while Signore Cizeta might have been a hellion, the unanimous opinion was that his V16T was one hell of a car. And proof that no matter what else, the engine is the most important part of a supercar. Zampoli was right. This needed to have 16 cylinders, or you wouldn't have clicked on this video in the first place.